Hi there. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the Fujifilm X-T5 and its autofocus capabilities. We ran well, I didn't run. My daughter ran. Now, before you scream child labor, she was paid $7 for like 15 minutes of work. Anyway, I set up the Fujifilm X-T5 to track, and I shot in low burst and high burst, but I also tried the Nikon Z6II to compare and the Sony A7 IV, all using like a 50mm focal length. But I want to talk about how I set up the Fujifilm, and maybe we could talk about how we get the best success with autofocus as well. So we'll make it like a teaching thing. The way we set up the Fujifilm X-T5 is obviously continuous focus, so I switched it to the little C on the front. I usually shoot action with Fujifilm cameras using a zone. You know, there's like single box, then you can go to a zone. That has been my go-to at Fujifilm cameras for anything running towards camera. But I wanted to test the new tracking autofocus, so I set it to wide. Next, on the autofocus menu on page 3, you want to, I set release and focus priority. And this just means the camera will either prioritize focusing first before it fires, or it won't even care. It'll just take the picture. And for these, I set them both to focus because I wanted to see, I actually did the test, I tested both, but I set the continuous to prioritize focusing before it fired a photograph. Now in the sprinting test with my daughter, what I found was you do get more frames if you have release, you know, the priority set to release, and but there were a couple of more that were out of focus. So that sort of made sense. The camera is just going to take the picture, and it doesn't care what you think. Now this brings up an interesting discussion. Do you want to make sure that the camera is autofocused before it fires a shot, or do you want to just get the shot? Because if you're shooting once in a lifetime events, there are some photos that are out of focus, but they're kind of maybe acceptably sharp or emotionally sharp, that it's better to capture the moment than sort of chance it. So you're gonna have to run your own tests to see, you know, for what genre you shoot photography. Is it better to have the priority be focus or release? So I tried both, and it made sense to me that there were more in focus with the priority in focus. Now, regardless if you have focus priority or release priority, you have to make sure that your AF plus MF setting under the second page on the menu is set to off, because if it's set to on, then neither one of those will be working correctly according to the manual. So just make sure your AF plus MF is set to off. And when we talk autofocus with Fujifilm, we have to there's always like a little footnote. And the footnote is the autofocus can be lens dependent. There are some lenses that are actually better performers than others, so keep that in mind. For this test, I was using the 35mm f2 just because that's the 50mm, equivalent focal length lens that I had. But if you use some of the older Fujifilm lenses, they may not perform as well, and Fujifilm is currently releasing newer and supposedly faster lenses for the newer, faster autofocus system. Now, the Nikon Z6II has the Nikon Z 50mm 1.8, so a native lens on there, and the Sony A7 IV has a 55mm 1.8 Zeiss. But really, when you shoot the Sony, it's almost just like it laughs at you at your silly tests. And the other thing I noticed about the A7 IV was that it would pick up an eye or head right away. The Fujifilm X-T5 also saw a face or head that was pretty small in the frame, which was really great to see. And which brings me to the Nikon. The Nikon would not see my daughter's face or head unless she was kind of larger on the sensor. Instead, what we would see is just an array of red boxes as she walked forward or ran forward, and then eventually would go to face or eye. Now, because it was a native lens, it did great. Even with the weird red boxes, we still had a high hit rate for Nikon with the walking and the sprinting. But this is something that's a little annoying with Fujifilm, is you kind of have to set these different parameters to get the best results. Again, lens dependent, situation dependent. I find that if you use a Sony camera or the Canon camera, like you can almost use it in any of the modes and it'll get the job done. So you have to have a little bit more knowledge about the menu, about the settings for your particular style of photography. So just keep that in mind. If you're using Fujifilm, you have to optimize the the settings, the box, the the different parameters for your type of photography. And it's funny, if someone sadly in a forum is like, I'm getting photos that are out of focus, you could just predict the comments that come after that. What lens are you using? What setting are you at? Did you turn this off? And it's kind of sad that you have to jump through these hoops to really get the best results from the camera, especially for beginners that are new to Fujifilm. The learning curve for getting the best results of their poor kid's soccer match. So think about that if you are jumping into Fujifilm, that you have to optimize the system to work for you. Also, I would love to see how the Fujifilm X-T5 fares against the older cameras, in case you guys are upgrading. So stay tuned for that. Obviously, this test is just a little sample, a little blip with my one lens and my one situation. We would need other lenses. We would need to test sports. We would need, there's a lot more to test, but at least we got started here. I would say the thing that was a little bit more concerning to me was the image quality compared to the full frame cameras. I know that the image quality from the X-T5 in maybe better light or lower ISO was very crisp and clear, what I was getting earlier. But here, I sometimes couldn't tell if the image was out of focus or if it was just kind of muddy looking, which was a little disappointed. So I need to run more tests there to see what's going on. Anyway, I'm just gonna run more tests, or not me, just get someone else to run. All right, I'll see you guys next time.